My name is Dylan Urquidi. My formal title at Labs, Unity Labs of Unity Technologies, is that of Senior Engineer on Editor VR. But one of the reasons I joined Labs and one of the reasons they'll have me is that I also spend quite a bit of time and have for quite a while doing design, UX, technical art for too many years to count, 2D, 3D art, audio engineering, a bunch of other things anyway. Great aspect of Labs is that they give us the freedom to be able to have fun in this area. Thanks for joining me in this brief discussion on a topic that is near and dear to me. My thanks to Ubisoft Toronto, to Justin and everyone for the invitation to attend and speak today. First off, anyone unfamiliar with Unity Labs, quickly, we're a division of Unity Technologies that's focused on the needs of the creators and hardware of tomorrow, usual cliche. But we have fun, we research, we experiment, we iterate, we break, and we try to perform the challenges and the tasks that users and designers are going to need to perform in 5 years and 10 years right now. So we can inform hardware makers, we can inform operating system developers, what that role should be and maybe what of the API should be open and what hardware features can go in. So it's an interplay of actually a fairly luxurious position of being able to be in between there and then be that voice in between, that advocate for the developer quite often. One of Unity's core missions, obviously. In order to better address the concepts I'd like to cover, the foundation of this talk is going to be quite a bit more philosophical than hands-on XR conventions of today. If I were to go into detail on any of the conventions that are valid today, in my opinion, they're probably going to be at least mostly invalid in XR, which is AR, VR, and MR, fairly soon. So I'm going to try to cover a broader subject matter that might allow you to carry whatever knowledge you might have in this area, or if you're not experiencing any development time in VR, AR, MR, where you might go in the future, how to keep that knowledge relevant and question it constantly and have it be applicable in the future. Because the top game today in VR that sells 1,200 copies, that establishes a design pattern that everyone adopts, I mean, it's not the largest sample base, and it's going to change quite a bit right now. Before we move on, I want to send a big thanks to Timmy West and Greg Madison of Labs for all their input, all their feedback, all their inspiration on some of the concepts contained herein and quite a few others outside of here. So let's begin. Now, I won't be speaking much to the common established XR patterns, as I said before. We'll talk about something a bit more interesting, though. So my XR design passions lie more in the path that we take to the future of UX design in XR rather than the practical stuff for today. It's how researchers, designers, artists, and engineers can all work together and craft this future. When hardware eventually permits, which, hint, hint, when you go in to upgrade your smartphone eventually and you're incentivized to get your new pair of glasses and drop your phone, that's going to come very quickly. Not that anyone has a smartphone in here, of course. And when that comes, we don't need to be inventing these conventions at that point. We need to be doing it today as designers, as researchers. This is going to replace basically, of course, everything in the mobile spectrum, and it's going to do the continuous damage that mobile is doing to desktop saturation. Obviously, consoles held up to a decent degree, but this will become part of the main pattern that, outside of consoles, you pretty much are going to have to deal with if you want to still be involved in this area or jump into this area. So these are a few of the top-level takeaways in advance that I'll attempt to cover here. I'll touch briefly on how I feel that these subjects will factor into the evolution of UX design and research with regard to XR. We'll explore the role that XR is going to play in the always-on lifestyle, where the designer and the researcher are going to be tasked to craft the UX patterns that are going to become the fundamental elements to our conscious experience. So consider what's about to happen when these glasses come on. This is the opportunity right now, and I hope to do with this talk to encourage everyone here to consider how it is that you as designers and researchers can play the role in making sure that when we live in this 24/7, that this is as aesthetically pleasing, this is as forgiving and inferring of intent that we can possibly have. So there's as little distraction overlaid on our vision as possible. Because if not, we stand to have trackers on everyone's head and stats and ratings, and there'll be advertisements popping up on everyone's shirt, and you could have just this mess that could be containing all of your vision. So the goal of this is to try to inspire simplicity. It's that when we eventually get these glasses, you don't even know you're wearing them until the proper context comes up, and then, if you've given the permissions, that content is displayed in an aesthetically pleasing way. So with that, we'll take a quick look at the state of XR today, a very quick look. Our taxonomies, our UX conventions, and our patterns are going to have to adapt to a multi-context domain. That multi-context domain is very important. I'm going to drill onto that when we get up to the XROS subject matter coming up here. One of the goals of the talks is to seek that transparency that I just described there. It's how can you as designers and researchers craft patterns that will allow execution of intent and actions without needing to throw up two-dimensional web UI, scroll bars, jQuery. Like how can this be put forth in a way that is sensitive to people with disabilities, is adaptable to an EEG situation, a 6DoF, a 3DoF situation, AR, MR, opaque pixel technology that'll merge VR and MR together at some point here. Like how is this story going to be crafted and played out through all of your eyes? And I keep saying XR. If you're not in the field, XR means what exactly? So it's all the Rs. We're just done hitting the 15 new Rs that we have now. There's augmented green screen, reverse backhanded dog reality. It doesn't even matter. It just covers the virtuality continuum. So we have what we all believe we're experiencing now, which is real life, in quotes. Then we've got the step from AR to MR, where you've got things overlaid or things intermixed, and then we go full virtuality, we go full immersion, which is VR, which is the Rift and the Vive, and you're living in that environment. It's more of an artistic experience, an all-encompassing one. AR versus MR, quickly hit this, because I'll touch on AR and MR very often throughout here. What the heck is the difference? I thought everything's AR. So AR, think about mecha overlays or Tony Stark's HUD. It's anchored to your vision. It's always hovering. It's not anchored to objects in the surrounding space. There's no occlusion. MR is actually what most people are thinking when they say AR. I assume, depending on marketing choices, this will or won't be clarified at some point. But MR is really what AR is. MR is an object is occluded, it's anchored to an object as I move, and it has an interplay with the content around me. Not that everyone doesn't want to live in HUD land, I'm sure. So necessary branching off of the well-defined landscape today is going to be pretty important. This shoehorning in, due to lack of experimentation of 2D UI, of, again, trying to make a web page something that you interact with spatially, it's lazy, and it doesn't need to be there. And it just means you haven't tried it all. It doesn't mean that in any context that grabbing and moving something in a slider doesn't have application, but it does mean that if your great 3-up web UI is something you pop into VR and all of a sudden you don't understand why retention has dropped. You're in a completely different situation. And seniority and any position that would try to push this on us so that when we're inside these glasses, when we're living in this, when this is our conscious experience, when this is shaping society and culture, when this is at that point, I think we'll all be very thankful if we've seen some experimentation, we've seen iteration, we've seen empathy on behalf of all the designers and researchers here on how it is that will allow someone to still interact with this content, live in their environment, and not just have that Blade Runner ad pop up right in front of you, hooked to your vision, and you've got to click to distract yourself. We want to avoid that. And again, on some of the today topics, I am going to have to skip past to get to the more important stuff later. So we'll quickly hit on today's experiential design. Really quickly through, don't make people puke. Don't frighten people unless you get off on it. Prevent fatigue. This is one thing that it's kind of a broken record, but it's an understandable thing that's hitting designers and researchers coming into this. This is one of the first input scenarios in which the designer has to care about endurance. When your user test sessions end up having someone say, I love it, it was great, I got tired halfway through and I had to sit down, and then half of the UX didn't do anything for me. You know, I had to keep standing up to perform action X, Y, or Z. The UI didn't cater to my position. It didn't understand that there was a context change in between me sitting, in between me standing. It didn't understand that I was passing the control from one hand to the other when I had to perform an action, say using analytics, 1,200 times in an hour on this hand versus 200 times on this hand. These are new considerations. These are things where everyone's going to prove out a design and then fall, and then get up and learn and fall and get up and learn, hopefully get up and learn. These are very important things that'll save everyone a lot of time when you get into this. Obviously pairing with everything I just said, ergonomics is extremely important here. You now have to care about the average length of a human arm. You have to care about the distance at which someone defined themselves based on height when they set this device up. You have to take into consideration the distance from myself to this stand when placing UI, and if I'd even be able to interact with this, if UI is going to be anchored here in world space. You have to care about a chain of actions that if I had to perform them would start here, move to here, I drag this here and place this here. Can an arm do that? Because if my arm ends up over here, then an action that someone could just do by doing this, they end up having to walk across the room. Again, brand new considerations. Cross-app UX pollination, as I mentioned earlier, quite a bit of saturation is happening in this area where, you know, the blockbuster title that sells 200 copies gets 1,200 copycats on a UX pattern that didn't have a well-established testing base. And that's fine, but it doesn't mean adopt it without experimentation. It's up to everyone in this room and anyone that will see this video at some point to have put in the time and fallen and gotten back up and teach us all the lessons that are going to make this scenario the one that we actually need in about 5 to 10 years. Multi-user UX is hell. We're dealing with that right now in Eder VR, using an awesome tool called Scene Fusion, which does a good job, but having to deal with the interesting situation in which 2 people want to use the same UI at the same time. What happens? Do you spawn a ghost? Does it be a temporary one that the second person uses? When they let go, does that jump back to the first one there? If they start a user story there that depends on the first person's UI, that's a new complex interaction pattern. These are very, very fun challenges / torturous. So yes, input, interaction, a very important point, it's the middle one here, are psychologically relevant gestures and motion. So try, as designers and researchers, to take yourself out of your norms, which of course that's what we all have to do anyway when we're trying to have empathy with design and be considerate of different user bases. But in this case, now we have to be concerned with cultural norms as well, more so than we ever have. Of course, they've always need to be taken into account, but now you have to understand that a gesture of this in one culture versus a gesture of this, that could mean a completely different thing to another. This is the first time where when we have these on and we're expressing things with our hands or our fingers or to whatever extent that we are, you'll need to have context changes in between the device sensing a cultural norm, basically context change. So now as the designer, there are patterns that we've never had to care about that will change dynamically. You'll get on a plane here, and this gesture will be fine and acceptable here, and you'll land here, and this gesture will be offensive. So we'll need to inform the user, we'll need to educate the user, and learn how to have a feedback pattern with users that can convey these cultural and individual, this could even be on a personal basis, these types of changes proactively, but in a subtle way. You know, that's a language that doesn't exist. That's one of the things that I want to speak to today because it's becoming not an issue, but it's something that will be a concern when we have these on. And no one solved this to any degree right now. It's very, very clumsily handled at this point. P.S. Anyone who makes XR devices, give us more buttons, please, please. Jeez. This picture's awesome. Don't ever make this picture. This is a troll. Information architecture is extremely important in XR. It is everywhere, of course, but extremely so in XR. There are a number of scenarios going on right now where individuals are trying to cram so much content into a situation to provide more freedom to the user, in that the user, we can gauge with analytics and heat maps based on gaze, they don't know what they're supposed to go to. You know, presenting that many options and then not taking depth into account compounds the issue, of course. This can be extended to many, many ways. Pace and timing, also extremely important. Something that, you know, you have to care about if you're doing UX for a rhythm game, a fighting game, maybe Warframe, something along those lines. But this plays an even more important role in that, again, you're dealing with dexterity and ergonomics in this case. So one of the patterns that labs were exploring, as we're constantly trying to test what it is we're learning, and then how to be able to express this out and serve this to the developer community as a foundation that they can build on, educate us, and we can play with that feedback means. We're experimenting with a holistic design pattern that's attempting to tackle part of these, the set of issues here, and the transition from VR into AR and MR, and we call this the spatial pattern, for lack of a better name at this point. But one goal of the pattern is to be able to add functionality to Editor VR today that we have to serve to a Vive or a Rift customer, and anticipate the input that will come from a HoloLens, from a Magic Leap, et cetera, but nest that into the same functionality. One of the rules in Editor VR that we have, and this might benefit some of the people doing XR dev at some point, especially design side, is that we always allow 2, maybe 3 or 4 ways of achieving the exact same thing. It's the most interesting thing to see once someone explores another way or finds another way through a tutorial, how it is that they chain one to the other based on choice, based on, again, the length of someone's arm. It influences the decision that they'll go from choice to choice. Their choice to be sitting as opposed to standing mostly will influence a different set of patterns that they choose. So in this pattern, really quickly, I'll hit on spatial scrolling. So the core of this pattern is the inversion of space. It's how we treat what it is we're defining the user story with. So in most applications in XR right now, you have tools, and you have hands, and you'll point at a thing, and you'll click at a thing. And there's this paradigm of thinking that we're shoehorning controllers into the situation because people are used to it, and that's good, and it helps as an introduction to many users. But in the situation when we're living with this, when this is our conscious experience and we have these glasses on, let's think about something different. Let's think about what happens when the controller's gone and it's a pinch, like the HoloLens, or if it's tactile haptic feedback, where you can swipe on your hand, left and right, up and down, or on your clothing, like some of the projects that Google is working on right now, and you can convey the set of actions that you would like using different means, basically using a set of either X and Y or X, Y, and Z coordinates. So long story short, instead of having to take my hand, point it at this, click it, select something, and then click again, we've introduced a pattern where it's a single grip press, pops up a spatial selection direction hint just to users to be able to see where they need to go, and then the user chooses the vector they drag. So click, vector drag. I'd love to show a video of this, pardon me, but didn't make it in. Click, drag, release. So when that drag and release, as you can see in the image, you'll actually be scrolling through content and then selecting. Now, that's a single button press, drag, and release. That's a very simple user story to accomplish a set of actions where right now everyone's trying to shoehorn this in, just like they are web UIs. The more interesting part is when we pair this with the alternate UI, the gaze-based UI. So the user now, once they get that down, they can divorce that, and then anywhere they're looking, they can do that click. That UI pops up here because it detects that the gaze is not looking at the hand, and when they do the drag, the scrolling of content occurs here, unless they look again at their hand, and then the UI goes back to the hand, they're allowed to scroll there. If they break away again, it gets anchored in space. It doesn't follow the gaze, it's anchored in space. So this allows a situation where someone could be on their back, just looking at the roof, doing some painting in whatever application, click, drag, they've made a selection. Click, drag, drive, drill, release. They've gone through 3 different menus. They never need to look at their hand. They never need to change the content that they were looking for. Everything is intelligently semi-transparent and obscured to allow people to still see their content in this scenario. So this is one example of being able to shorten the user story, being able to experiment with space. Cool, so the AR-MR transition here, maturing the XR-UX ontology. This will happen after the smartphone upgrade. Proper UX handling of AR and MR, as I mentioned earlier, needs to be existing well before this point. Briefly, devices, big point there is EEG input and brain-computer interfaces once we eventually get there beyond glasses. You've seen Elon Musk's, I believe, Neuralink effort and a few others that are aiming for this. There's the emotive Epic and a few other devices today that can achieve this, where you can be sitting down with one of these on and using something like the spatial design. You can pick a point in space, that will be your scroll start. You can move that with your mind, and that will scroll the options and you can release. So you adopt the approach that HoloLens can use for pinch, drag, release, use it with EEG, point creation through thought entrainment, drag, release, same thing. Again, work in VR, work in AR, work in MR. Design, we basically covered most of that. XR operating systems, this is gonna be a big key thing. This is another core element that I'd like to add importance to with this talk, is that it's up to everyone in this room, and I really wanna put this through, it's up to everyone here to hold the gates of the API open for these XR operating systems. Whatever it is that you try, the bounds that you test, the lessons you learn, and hopefully the successful app that you release that establishes itself so that these operating systems can't close the door on those patterns, you give those to me. You give those to everyone else in this room. You give those to every other designer, every other researcher in the future. If you don't test those boundaries and you stay with the conventions that are being established today, when we're living in that, then we're bound to that. The operating system will own everything that we don't invest ourselves in today. Let that sink in. That's extremely important. When there are no phones, when we live in this, everyone's effort in this room to explore and make that killer app, establish that pattern, we all get that. So thank you in advance to whomever it is that might attempt to do this so that the rest of us can benefit. Ontological blending is going to become a very important thing. Everything I've been describing, we're defining these new ontologies. We're evolving current ontologies. And we need to start thinking about compartmentalizing these and modularizing these ontologies so that AI, through machine learning, through deep learning, can handle automatic crossfading in between these. So all of the next headsets coming out, even the next HoloLens, these are all inbuilt with machine learning hardware. As designers and researchers, we need to exploit this. We need to say that when we know someone is sitting versus standing, when we know someone is in VR mode in their glasses and then they switch to AR mode, we need to design for these conventions and then understand how to convey this to a machine learning algorithm so that it handles that automatically. So you could have a team of designers each handling a concept or a context rather, or better yet, utilize AI and just become the curators. Don't be frightened of the jobs that this will replace in here. You guys are safe. The engineers, they're in trouble at some point here. But designers and researchers, it's still there for you. You get to become the DJs of UX at some point. But you've got to get out of the mindset of saying, this is how it's done. This is the one way. You need to start thinking about modularization and how blending will occur. Again, that example of getting off the plane and landing somewhere else. Please invent that pattern. We're waiting on it. We already understand the issue. That needs to be there. We need a very refined, very transparent version of that for users. PS, AI-driven machine or AI-driven unit testing for UX is going to be awesome. It's going to make engineers go crazy, of course, but it's going to be absolutely awesome. We're playing with a little bit of that right now. Being able to have a unit test on a hypothetical UX pattern is pretty sweet. So one of the key points here is the lifestyle that this will take on. So it's extremely important, again, I've come back to this point a couple times, that this is going to be what influences human interaction. That gate that you're keeping open with all the experimentation that you're all going to do after this talk, and all the bounds testing, and all the inventions, and all the killer apps that are gonna keep all these conventions open, that's going to allow humans to express themselves and not be bound by what the operating system wouldn't allow them to do in that case. And it's great. The operating systems will need to maintain a multi-context environment because you won't, with these glasses, be in an environment where there's an app. That's going away. That won't exist. There will be layered contexts that take priority, and that priority will be leveraged by the OS. In this environment where your app and your UX pattern is competing with 4 other patterns, it's up to us to inform the OS in advance what it is that we want it to allow us to be able to express. Because they have to make these decisions as these OSs are being developed right now. So we get to educate them through what it is that we create right now and the bounds that we try to cross. This is extremely important. Every single new thing that everyone in this room tries to do in XR, and you establish and you share and we all learn from and we all iterate from, that will be another freedom that we all have when we're living in this. So please. Effortless natural action. Again, one of the goals I feel strongly about is that this is transparent when this hits. The goal when these are on is not that I have Tony Stark's HUD on me 24/7 and that's my new conscious existence and neon orange is how I end up defining everything around me. It's that I get to play a role in the aesthetics that are interplaying with my consciousness, interplaying with my interaction with other individuals, and the way I choose to express myself, whether it be through the gesture of a finger like Project Soli, whether it be through haptic feedback on something on my clothes, or whether it be dancing through the subway. Like we get to offer this to the user. These get to be patterns we define. It would be the most amazing thing to see 9 people walk off the subway all doing breakdancing, for example, but they're all answering their email. These are patterns we get to invent. To and from of action, important, style, individual expression, again, this all goes back to what I was going into there. But the negation of UI can't be emphasized enough. It's extremely important. The design, research, and patterns that are so tightly anchored to UI right now, understand what that's going to mean here. Like, we can take for granted that voice is going to solve everything. We can break it in almost every case right now. It's wonderful if you're alone. It's not quite as great if you're in the middle of an office and you're trying to speak out commands and while you're reporting to someone on Slack or something like this. These scenarios aren't going to work. When there are 10 people talking in the middle of a loud party or something like that, we can't rely on the single catch-all. But we can define the transparent language that allows these actions, depending on context, to still be executed from beginning to end. These are new things. These are things we haven't had to care about before. We haven't had to have a device context inform the user that it was too loud to convey an action, and according to the people around them, there's a culturally appropriate way to do a certain thing, and chained upon that, you also need to be doing another thing at the same time. These are very cool, very interesting, slightly frightening challenges. And I hope that this talk encourages exploration into the topics above, the roles that we can play as designers, as researchers, as artists, as any potential role of anyone that's sitting in this room and will end up hearing this, in shaping the language of XR, of social interaction, of human interaction. Design for VR today, again, jobs, but design with AR and MR in mind for tomorrow. There's no reason you have to limit your pattern today. There's no reason if you can't show that your pattern is successful and delivers to the user right now. And again, you can have multiple patterns achieve the same thing, but you're beginning to push your design into the next domain. You're beginning to open that door that I'm talking about. You're beginning to give us all options here. So deadlines are one thing. You've got to be able to hit them, I understand, but test those boundaries. Embrace AI, don't hate it. Designers are lucky. Engineers and everyone below, they're going well before designers are. It's the individual with creativity and the ability to anticipate and think about human emotion and interaction. Those are the ones that'll go last, so jump on board. Multi-context design, I touched on it briefly, let me hit it really quickly again. Again, single apps are gone at a certain point. So begin to define the convention that becomes a transparent thing that can be carried through multiple contexts being operated at the same time. You'll be answering email, you'll be buying dog food, you'll be tweeting something at the same time, and you'll also be playing a cookie clicker at the same time. There's got to be an interplay there. It's going to exist. The OS will own it if they have to, but we can play that role as well. I guess wrapping up, thank you all for allowing me to address the subject matter that I feel near and dear about. And I pretty much think about this time, this is probably the perfect audience to have done so. I'm really looking forward to seeing and hoping that something comes from this talk, that there are developments that you end up educating us back at Labs with and every other developer out there that we can all share, that we can all iterate on. Because this is an early point. These are the problems that we can help solve today, and that we will all have bettered our existences, our experience, our social interaction. All of this is going to benefit immensely from everyone testing these boundaries and sharing it with everyone else in this room. So feel free to follow our research, explorations, and experiments on the Unity Labs blog, labs.unity.com. And I appreciate you hearing me out. Thank you very much.